All right, so we got a lot of comments on we should have welded that 5.9 block because it's so easy to weld an engine block. It's called stitching something? Cold stitching, yeah. Maybe not cold stitching, I don't know, regardless. Anyway, we put on APV and said somebody bring us a cracked block, so I think somebody gave us a little Ford 2000. I'm thinking it's cracked because this plate goes all the way around the engine. It holds the starter on this side, it holds the hydraulic pump on the other side. The customer told me he suspects there's a frost plug that came out of the back of the head. I can't see a frost plug popping out without it being all mangled inside with the starter. So I'm thinking cracked block. You want to make a bet?
I said cracked block.
Okay, I'll say frost plug because the customer says frost plug, and I'm hoping that he did his homework and said that that's a common thing, and you go with cracked block.
I think it's cracked block, even though I have no idea about anything about these.
Anyway.
But it's probably the only Ford Rich would drive.
Anyway, we're going to split a 2000 Ford.
Nice.
Here we go.
This video is sponsored by Google. I recently purchased a farm tractor, Ford 2000, 3 cylinders, been working great, but I have a coolant leak where the block mates up with the transmission housing. Don't see any leaks at the head. What is it? Blah, 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 blah. Long story short, tore down engine and found a crack at the top of 3rd cylinder. Didn't make the oil milky though. I guess it was boiling it away. Yes, there is a freeze plug at the back of the block. Mine was very rusted and had been leaking a little. Well, this is leaking a lot. There's no way that a freeze plug just pops out. So I think he's good.
It could have rusted through.
Could have rusted through. So now we're back again. All right, I'm going with rusted frost plug. You're going with cracked block. All right.
We're going full crack on this one. Full crack.
So first thing you want to do is take your hood off. You might as well just take the whole hood off so you can get access to these 2 bolts on the bracket that holds the regulator.
Oh man, this is so stupid. It's like in a cage, not. Oh, I think I got it. Yeah. Oh yeah! Oh, that piece of nut.
And then you can disconnect your main harness and your fuel line right here. Secure the pivot point, because otherwise when you roll it apart, it's going to tip over. And sometimes I need to watch my own videos to remind myself of that. Other than that, your 2 power steering lines need to come undone. You've got your speedo, which just unscrews, and it's a square drive. Just might get sticky, just pull on it. You got your throttle linkage and your fuel shutoff. This is your main hydraulic pump, which is just a drive that goes on the flywheel. So you can take the 4 bolts off and just lift that out of the way. The steering, crack the steering linkage off. Just take the nut loose, but don't take it all the way off. Stick a bar in there, pry on it, and take a hammer and just crack that part right there. I think it'll work. Yeah, like that. You leave the nut on so you don't go flying backwards, but every steering will work the same way. Take your 2 lines off, your feed and return lines off of the steering, and then take the 3 bolts off that hold your cap on. Do that on both sides. Just move the steering out of the way. This one has a plow on the front, so we had to take this linkage off. Yours might not have it, and that's fine.
I should have thought about where I'm going to put it first.
Don't have to disconnect anything from your starter. Just take the starter off, which are these 3 bolts. You've got 2 big bolts at the top. There's 2 on each side, and then there's 2 at the bottom. And there was ours had a little set screw. If you don't take those off, you're gonna have a hard time prying them apart. There's a shut off on your tank. Shut your tank off. That is your fuel feed. And your return, just take the return off of, I don't know if that's a regulator, I don't know what that is, some sort of filter, and then just unplug your main harness from the front of the tractor. Support the back of the tractor, support the front of the tractor, and then you're able to roll it away. It doesn't matter whether you roll your front half forward or your back half backwards, whatever you want. Figure that out yourself, and you've got a Ford 2000 in 2 pieces. Here we go. It's not going to fly apart on it, is it?
I don't know. That's why I'm standing over here.
Never. I think we're okay. The clutch is in perfect shape. That's quite the flywheel, eh?
Yeah, that's a big flywheel. got some rotating mass. Oh yeah.
Holy shnikey! That is not like...
100-pounder. More nuts.
Ah, I got rusted frost plug. I win.
Man, that is a rust. Look at how much.
Yeah, that sucks.
That's crazy.
Well, that's good for him because the clutch is fine and the frost plug is... So we don't get to make the video on welding a cracked block, but we'll show you how to pop this out and then pop a new one back in again and then pull the tractor back together again. And there it is, $1, $2, $3, and $4. And this. So this, how do we prevent this? Well, change your antifreeze. If you've ever built a car and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna put some water in it and I'll put glycol in it later. Well, it doesn't take long for the insides to start rusting. And over time, the glycol starts to lose kind of its anti-rust inhibitors or whatever's in there to magically not make things rust and scale up. So we've had a block outside that had water in it. It's in the molasses tank right now, just to get the inside jackets nice and clean. And I'm going to have to pressure wash this block as best as I can and just run a bunch of cleaning agents through it after we roll it back together again, because it was dirty inside. And all that happens is it's from lack of changing antifreeze. Now this thing only gets a few hours a year, probably 10 hours a year cutting grass. And it's one of those things you don't think of. It's nobody's fault, but all of a sudden you've got a rusted out frost plug that now caused a big bill because you had to bring it to the shop. They had to split it and it was $1. So change your antifreeze, if nothing else. Those old tractors, go change the antifreeze because you can prevent this. Only you can prevent this. So we're going to pressure wash that out, roll it back together again. Done lots of these tractors by myself. I'm going to pressure wash that out, clean it out as best as I can, make a bigger mess in the shop, and then clean up the mess, go for supper, and then maybe get back at it tonight. So here we go. Okay, so this is just the cover for the drive gear for the gear pump. I just wire wheeled it and threw a bunch of grease on it. Put a bunch of grease on the frost plugs, keep them rusting from the outside. And put the plate back on again and the flywheel, and start rolling it back together again. I'll take the release bearing out, fill the center up with grease and just find something that fits inside the hole and just give it a sharp tap. The grease displaces all the air inside the cavity there, and as you hit it, the grease turns around and pushes the bearing out. I've heard of using breadcrumbs. I've also heard a story where the back of the crank was more of a frost plug and there was oil galleries on the other side, and the guy ended up putting an entire loaf of bread into the crank before he popped the bearing out, and needless to say, it didn't get oil, and that was a $7,000 mistake. So I like grease. Well, let's go with grease for now. Bread does too. Just don't, like 1 or 2 pieces of bread, not the whole loaf. So a worn clutch, you basically just see how much lining is left to the rivets, and we've got lots. So we want to make sure there's no hot spots and that all the rivets are tight. July 24th, 1979. So that's not to say that this clutch is, let's see, 21 plus 19. Hey, 40 years old. It could be new old stock, who knows. But I'm gonna put it back in again because it looks fine. So springs are tight. They're not all sloppy in there. So I changed the release bearing and the pilot bearing and roll it back together. Here we go. All right, when you're putting your pressure plate back on, make sure you bolt it down nice and even, and that the pressure or the clutch plate is centered to the pilot. You can do that by eye. This one seems to be the exact same size as the pressure plate, so you basically just line it up. I think that's pretty close. So once that's all nice and tight, we'll roll her back together. Here we go.
All right, so this tractor should take about 15 minutes to roll together. If it's any less than that, you probably forgot the clutch or one of the shafts, mainly the input shaft. If it takes any longer, you almost need to stop and walk away. I spent about 45 minutes on this trying to get the stupid thing to line up. And what was actually happening was that front plow mount is on crooked. So I'm trying to roll the tractor together to line up the input shaft and the bolt holes, and this back bell housing has to slide in between those mounts there. And what was happening is because it was crooked, it was just shoving the back end crooked all the time. It was impossible. It'd be impossible to get it together. Tried the bars, tried pushing on it, snapped the one bar. It shouldn't take that much to shove a little tractor like this together. So just one of those things. If it doesn't work, you know what? Go in the house, watch some YouTube videos, watch some Deboss Garage. Come back, think about it, take a look at it, you know, have a coffee, stare at it. I'm like, okay, I gotta do something different. Try it 3 times. If it doesn't work, it's not a coincidence. Something's wrong. Try again, which is what I did. Walked away, swept it, still fought for it with about 10 minutes, and like, okay, that's definitely something's wrong there. Roll it right together. It's only one clutch. It's not even like there's a PTO clutch to line up. So it's together. We'll bolt it back up again. Place the gasket. Remember that this gasket is also a shim. You can't change the thickness of the gasket. It'll change your backlash on that gear. Change the fuel filter because we took that fuel filter off, and tractor's ready to go. Here we go. All right, so we got the tractor kind of back together. You got some pretty gross water coming out of there. Got a bit too much going in. We'll slow that down a little bit. We'll fire up the tractor, just let it run until all the water is nice and clear coming out. Maybe try some CLR, kind of get rid of that rust, but anyway, I'm making a mess. I'm gonna slow that down. I know the guy that poured this floor though, he was thinking that the doors, when you pull something in and the snow melts, it'll run out the door. Smart.
Not ready yet.
Wondering why I'm dressed in white, it's because the owner of this tractor is also the guy who bought the FLYWHEEL. So I'm going to drop this off, pick up the FLYWHEEL, we're going to install a glove box and the radio in that one and make sure it's good for the season. So here we go.